Hello and welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. I think Big Talk is the best way to connect to people. And I'm really excited for my guest today because Shane Feldman is an expert on figuring out how to connect to people and create community. Shane believes a community is the answer to every question and the solution to every problem. He has been recognized by the White House, Prime Minister of Canada, and the United Nations for his achievements in community leadership. He helps leading brands optimize team, culture, leadership, engagement, and retention. Shane is the founder of Count Me In, the world-renowned social entrepreneurship incubator and community of 10.2 million people across 104 countries. 10.2 million people across 104 countries. It started off as a small project out of his high school locker. Over the past 10 years, it's grown and has launched more than 30,000 ventures worldwide, contributing a value of over 2.6 billion with a B billion dollars to the global economy through service. Now, you know that I am a big giant service geek, having been part of the founding of AmeriCorps here in the United States. So when I first learned about Shane and I first met Shane, I was like, we need to be friends. So Shane can count me as a friend, but also he's been featured by Larry King, by Dr. Oz in Forbes, People magazine. He's the subject of a TV series from A&E, and his book last year was picked by Oprah as one of her favorite things. So Shane, welcome to Big Talk. I'm really excited to talk to you today about what you learned from your travel in 28 countries and just all the things that you've been up to, community, this idea of community through COVID, all of it. Let's talk.
Let's do it. I'm always excited to talk with you, Laura. It's just so great to be here.
So I want to start by talking about this idea of community in COVID, because I think a lot of us in COVID have learned that community is maybe different than what we thought it was. Maybe what we expect from it is different than what we thought. Maybe what we get from it, what we need to give to it.
Mhm.
What have been some of your lessons about community at a time when community's really been tested?
Yeah, I kind of went into COVID with what felt like a PhD in community building. I've researched community building and community leadership in 28 countries around the world. And I've really picked up some of those universal tactics and some of the more nuanced emotional elements that help humans connect with one another. And I feel like the most fundamental element that I picked up over the last decade that really helped me throughout the last 12 months was that community isn't something that you find, it's something that you create. And so being able to be a little bit more intentional about the way that I am connecting digitally, virtually with others, the way that I'm showing up, the way that I'm listening, I think has been really key in me staying, frankly, sane throughout this last year. I think we're all born to be community builders. We are social animals. And of course, we crave real in-person connection with people. But we also live in this glorious age of digital opportunities. And we get to see each other this way, even though you and I are technically in different countries right now. And 5-10 years ago, this was not an option for the number of people that it is an option for today.
So this has been a really interesting year here in the United States. And I know that you have your own stuff going on in Canada where you are. So in 2019, as you know, right, we all struggled worldwide with this COVID pandemic. And we also had the beginnings of a racial reawakening here in the United States, Black Lives Matter, and our 2020 election and all of that. You have, for lack of a better word, you have kids being dug up from the ground throughout Canada, from Indigenous populations. I feel like this is happening everywhere. Like in every country around the world, there is this moment where we can no longer hide from our past and pretend it doesn't exist, right? Like it's not that police brutality got worse, it's that people are now filming it, right? Like we suddenly have to focus on that. And I'm curious, as you travel the world and you learn how to build community, are there parts of the building of community that you found that we should be revisiting as we're now being tested and have to figure out how do we rebuild around ideas about who we thought we were, who we actually are, who we need to become?
Yeah, I think an important place to start there is that we are not our history, and yet we still need to learn from it to transcend it, right? It is not necessarily my fault, right? What happened 10, 20, 50, 100 years ago, but I still need to deal with that today. I can't play ignorance. And so I think we're entering this phase now where there are generations of people that are owning up to mistakes and tragedies and murders that happened so many years ago. Not to mention the systemic racism and so many other of those kind of reawakenings, let's call them, that have come to the surface, to the really the global population in the last couple of years. When I think back to all of my travels and kind of what I've picked up along the way in terms of how we could perhaps apply a new, we'll call it a community building tool or strategy to grappling with this new time, with these reawakenings, I think about South Africa. I had the incredible opportunity to live amongst Zulu tribes on the far east coast of South Africa. And they have an incredible greeting ritual there called Sawubona. And what happens is two people will gaze into each other's eyes for 10 seconds in complete silence, which sounds totally awkward in North American standards. And then the elder of the two will say Sawubona, which literally means I see you, to which the younger responds Sekona, which means I am here. So Sawubona, you're basically welcoming that person into existence. And there's just like this deep almost intuitive knowing of, I really see all the best parts of you, all the fullest parts of you. And Sekona is really you allowing that person to see you, to bring you into existence in that moment. And I think we need more of that in the westernized world. We need more people that are listening incredibly deeply. I mean, if we just redefine, leadership as 10 seconds of Sawubona, I think that would dramatically change everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. I've talked about this before, but I think it's the difference between being loved and being seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like somebody like growing up, a lot of us experience this, we had, if we were lucky, we had love from our parents, but a lot of times that love was you do well in school, you get an A, you're a good kid, I love you, right? Good job. Or you're polite to the house guest or whatever. And it's like, this is my kid, she's good, I love her. But like, what if we flew our freak flag? Like, what if we walked around? What if we were who we were? Were we still worthy of love? Like, what if, I've always thought it was really interesting that in school, you have to get an A in history and an A in English and an A in math and an A in science and an A in PE and an A in, foreign language, whatever it is. But like, what if you're just like a super math kid, right? Or what if you're like a super literature kid and you're not going to do that well in the other? Does it make you less worthy? Why can't we strive to be who we are and be seen and be loved for that? So this idea of Sawubona, that I see you, right? I see you and I take you in, and it's all there. I think it's such a beautiful concept. But I think now, in the times we're living in, it means like I have to not only do I have to see you, you have to see me, but we have to see both the strengths and the challenges and the history. But even if we are not our past, or we are not somebody else's past, what do we represent from other people? And there's such a, I don't know if it's like a knee-jerk defensiveness or like a laziness, because it's so easy to create our own communities where we're siloed into one place and one place only. We don't have to listen to the rest. How do we see the people who make us uncomfortable? How do we be seen by the people who make us uncomfortable?
Well, so in my personal experience, and based off of my experience and every conversation I've ever had with a therapist or psychologist, what typically happens when we're dealing with someone that perhaps makes us uncomfortable is that on a subconscious level, we are shedding just a tiny sliver of light on a part of ourselves that make us uncomfortable, right? So I think what we're really talking about here at a foundational level is acceptance, both acceptance of others, radical acceptance of others, and also self-acceptance, right? The ability to just see the humanity, even through tragedy, even through people that we feel are on the furthest opposite side of the spectrum of where we choose to live our lives. It's finding the love within us to offer that unconditional acceptance and just really show up and celebrate the humanity in others. And perhaps instead of feeding into anger or hate, we feed into curiosity and perhaps sadness, right? I think, sometimes it feels right to pity or to feel sad, or like how heartbreaking that someone could actually feel that way, right? How heartbreaking that someone could actually do something like that instead of saying, well, I hate them, what a terrible person, right? I think it's feeding into that curiosity and just opening up our minds just a little bit more. If we all did that, just 1%, I think it would shift the way that not only we are able to show up with and for others, but also perhaps more importantly, the way that we can show up and accept ourselves.
It is true. I will say the things that make me craziest about other people are probably the things that I am not wanting to accept about myself, right? Or like my own weaknesses or things that I perceive.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, oh God, that's a real truth right there, right? So, we all have to walk around with this idea that everybody's struggling with something we know nothing about. So, a few years ago, I was driving in traffic, and I was with my then 16-year-old, who's now 19, and he's sitting in the front seat with me, and we're driving along, and the person behind me was like on my tail. They were like tailgating me. They were honking. They were clearly like pissed off I wasn't going faster, but there was someone in front of me. There were, we were right by a high school. There were people crossing the street. I couldn't go any faster. Like, this is what I was doing. And then the light changes and I could go. And I said to my son, that fucking asshole, like, I'm just going to drive slow just to screw him because he was such a jerk to me. And my son turns to me and he's like, Mom, that's a real dick move. And I was like, what? And he goes, you have no idea what's going on with him. Like, maybe he's late to a job interview and he's afraid if he doesn't get the job, he's going to, lose his house. Maybe his wife's in labor. Maybe he's just had a really hard day. Like, you don't know what's going on with him. Like, why would you carry him? Why would you take his anger and carry it? Like, just let him go around you. Like, who cares? Like,
your son sounds like Buddha.
And I was like, what? Like, how did you get so wise? So that's my question for you, Shane. How did you get so wise? So you're in high school, you start this project, you started out of your high school locker. How does it start? What did you want to do? And were you just like, I'm just going to get an A on this class in this semester?
Totally.
Or did you have this idea of this, like, I'm going to create a worldwide movement?
No. Yeah. Okay. So I guess it was two things. One was, part of it was sort of part of a class that I was taking. So it actually was a bit of a project. I was like, I'm going to do really well in this. And I got an A. And the other part was honestly more of a coping mechanism, if I'm being honest. I mean, I started high school, didn't really know anyone, had moved to a new community, had no friends, felt super lonely. It was not a fun time. And I felt like the more I was getting involved, the more I was kind of meeting people. And so Count Me In really started as this project, this way for me to connect with others. Like, if I start a club that's all about getting involved in the community, maybe I'll actually make some friends through the process. And so it was more of a selfish coping mechanism strategy, not at all about changing the world, not at all about starting anything big. I didn't even think about doing things outside of my high school walls. It was just about really starting a club or a project. And as it started to take off, we were really tapping into a lonely generation, right? This was just when smartphones were starting to take off. So it was really a turning point. And a lot of people were clearly feeling some of the same things that I was, because the first event that I thought maybe 50 kids would show up to, we had just under 400. So I think that was the turning point. And then what started as a bit of a vehicle for me to make new friends and meet new people turned into a vehicle that was more a means to an end in itself, in that I was just hooked on the busyness, right? The more Count Me In grew, the more that, well, it didn't matter that I didn't have many good friends. I was so busy. By 12th grade, I had my own office in the guidance department at school. Right. I was just so outside of classes, I was just working, and, entrepreneurism wasn't kind of the level of popularity that it is today. It wasn't even really a word back then. Right. But it certainly wasn't ubiquitous, but I was loving it. Right. I was just hooked on this busyness, very much in an unhealthy way for a period of time, falling asleep on my laptop more nights than I could count. That was really what was, I guess, the turning point also in the growth of Count Me In, for better or for worse. But it definitely wasn't this kind of like prodigy moment of me trying to go out and, save the children. That was so not the plan or the motive.
Yeah. So you start and you get 400 people to show up at this event. And did you realize in that moment, wow, we're really onto something? People are lonely. People want to
Yes and no. I realized, 400 people, that's not nothing. It's more than 50. I wonder if we can double it next year. But more than that, I realized this is a lot of fun. I kind of hated school. I wasn't having a great time elsewhere. And I was like, this was really fun to do. I want to plan another event. I want to see if we can do something bigger. Maybe we can take this on tour. Maybe we can do year-round programs. Like, what else could we make happen that could keep me busy and give me some more excitement in my life?
So would you say at that moment you were running towards this thing that was exciting to you, or were you running away from high school, which you didn't like, and this was sort of the excuse? You were building a path to get yourself away from where you were going, or was this so interesting that you were like, I found my thing?
Yes and yes. So I was definitely running away. I was definitely running away from all the ickiness. I was also running away from parts of myself, right? That was some of the joy of the busyness, is like, oh, I don't need to think about the fact that I don't have the kinds of friendships I thought you had in high school. I don't need to think about the fact that, I'm trying to figure out my sexuality and very confused on a daily basis. I don't need to think about the fact that I don't have a great relationship with my dad. Like, it was just this perfect distraction from all the less enjoyable parts of my life. And at the same time, it was a lot of fun in and of itself. Right. So I was like, ooh, maybe I can just kind of do more of this. So it was kind of a perfect recipe for coping and also for growth. Right. It definitely was a catapult and a vehicle for me to grow and evolve and find better parts of myself and healthier ways to live. And of course, looking back through all the ickiness and stickiness of growing it and thinking about how it really started, not kind of like the shiny bio founder story, but really how it actually happened. No matter how I slice it, the impact that the organization has had around the world, 104 countries, it's truly unbelievable to me what Count Me In has done over the last 12, 13 years. So no matter how I slice it, I'm very grateful for every point in the journey.
Sure. So, right. It's really funny. I tell people all the time, like, let me tell you some horror stories, because like you can write the shiny bio easy, right? Easy. But the moments that I'm most grateful for are not the, like, it's big, it's working, here it is, but it's like those moments in the middle where the lessons catalyzed for me. And maybe it was a lesson that somebody gave me 10 years ago that now I'm like, oh, that's what they meant when they said blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yes, that works. So you started, so let's talk about that sort of like the growing pain phase, right? Because like 104 countries, great. Starting in your locker, 400 people, I can imagine that. But how do you get from the 400 people at one event to the 10.2 million people around the world? Like, what was the next thing that you did after the 400 people when you're like, maybe this could be something, maybe this could be bigger? What did you start to do? Did you bring people around you? Did you look for investors? Did you just like, shoulder the wheel and just like take it on the chin yourself? Like, how did you get to how did you get through the adolescence piece?
I mean, investors, sure, like you needed money. That was definitely a big component of it. Trying to figure out how we could actually scale it, because at that point it was a lot of ambition for the sake of ambition, and just like, oh, I wonder if we could double the size. I wonder if 1,000 people would show up to this kind of event. And then one of the biggest, if not the biggest, turning point in the actual growth was when an intern, someone that was working for Count Me In back in 2014. At that point, we had started touring the actual conference to different cities across the country. And then this intern said, well, what if we take this conference we're touring, move it into one large venue, massive venue, and then stream it live so that anyone from anywhere in the world could actually tune in and take part and interact. And this was, of course, before virtual events were ubiquitous. This was one of the first of its kind. And I was like, well, it sounds interesting. Like, why don't you take it and run with it? See if you can find us a venue. Sure enough, he was able to help me negotiate one of the largest theaters in North America, 3,000 seat theater, the Sony Center, as it was called then. And we packed it with 3,000 students and then streamed it live. We ended up getting all these incredible partners who were kind of into the idea of breaking some records and seeing, well, could this be the largest youth run event in history? Like, when else has there been a group of students that have put on this kind of event? I'm like 19 years old at the time. I can't even rent a car. I can't drink legally in the US, and yet I'm producing this crazy event. We have a crew of 137 people. Those are just like the team backstage. It was nuts. And so that marketing engine kind of took on a life of its own. Largest youth run event in history kind of raises some eyebrows, and media was starting to pay attention. And so that was when we were able to actually start to get viewers from around the world. The first broadcast was 69 countries, and the following one we surpassed 100. So that was a huge catapult for us in viewership and also in many ways an impact.
So when did you start paying yourself?
Gosh, I've never been on salary with Count Me In. So I remember, my first mentor in the, call it corporate world, or like the for-purpose industry, I should really call it, was Adam Braun, who, of course, is the founder of Pencils of Promise, amazing organization out of New York that does remarkable work overseas. Their thing is education for all. And Adam actually started Pencils of Promise the same time I was starting Count Me In. The difference being I was a high school student and he had just left Bain & Company. So just a little bit more experience than me. Right. And so he became a mentor. We met at his office the first time in New York. We met another couple times, and there was one time we met in LA, and we were out grabbing a coffee, and I'll never forget, like, sitting at the patio. I can still picture the whole day, and this is like I don't know, 9-10 years ago. Yeah. And he said, Shane, if you are going to build anything that is at all sustainable, you have to do three things. Number one, you have to find a way to pay yourself. You have to find, even if it's not a salary, you need to find some way for consistent, sustainable income for you. Number two, you need to hire an assistant. Make sure there's someone to do the things that you either don't want to do or don't need to do. And number three, you have to build and scale whatever you start to the point that you can take a sabbatical, step away for a year, and have it run without you. And the first two I picked up almost instantaneously. Within 6 weeks of that meeting, I had hired my first assistant, and I actually put a bit of a financial plan in place for me to have consistent income from speaking. So not from salary, but from speaking. And then the sabbatical took me a few years to check off. That was the most daunting one for sure. But a hugely impactful one. That was in 2017. I was able to step away for a year. And if I hadn't done that, I don't think I'd be where I am today, in that in March, I was actually able to step down as CEO from Count Me In, to resign from that post, stick on as the chair of the board. But now I'm starting some new adventures, and I've joined another company since. So I'm grateful for those lessons, and I needed all three of those check boxes. I needed the income, I needed the assistant, and the team at that, and the sabbatical.
Yeah. I asked that question because I think it's a problem a lot of founders face, is the like, I'm doing this because I love it, and I'll take whatever's left over. I mean, I certainly did that when I started my last company, which was a for-profit company. I remember sitting down with a business coach who was like the number 2 to Jack Welch at GE for a number of years, and I couldn't afford him, but he owed a favor to a friend of mine, and so I was the favor, I guess. So he sat down with me, and one of the very first questions he asked me was, "How do you pay yourself?" And I was like, "Well, we bring in all the money from our clients, and then I pay my team, and then we invest a little bit in infrastructure. We put a little bit away for a rainy day, and then I pay myself what's left over." And he just was like, "What? Like, that's not a business. Like, what are you talking about?" He's like, and what he said was, "Stop thinking like a girl." And I was like, "Ow."
Wow.
But okay. Yeah. I mean, it was not very PC, but it was pretty blunt. And so the idea of of creating structure around who you are and your role in the company or in the organization, even though you're somebody who's doing because you love it. It's so exciting. I mean, that's a real growth moment. That's a real maturity moment for the organization.
Yeah.
But I got other advice years later from somebody after she found out I was talking to this guy, and she's like, that's boy advice. Girl advice. So I was like, all these like boomers are talking to me in like the least PC way ever. But what she said was, if you're building a company you can't step away from, you're a micromanager, right? Like you got to build something, like either you're building an institution or you're building a cathedral. So if you build a cathedral, as soon as you leave, it's gone. As soon as you take a weekend off, it stops moving. If you take a sabbatical, forget about it. But an institution can outlive you. But an institution's also hard because it means you have to sort of put your ego aside and let other people do stuff that it's not just having them do the stuff you hate, right? Like you can give the assistant all the stuff that like is just not the highest and best use of your time, but you actually have to hire people around you who do the stuff that you love doing, but may not be the right thing for you to do at that moment. If you're out chasing funders and corporate partnerships, you don't get to do all the meetings with local people that you might have loved to do. So how did you, as you had to change your role, did you have to figure out how to enjoy the new role more, or was it always just fun as you were growing it?
As I was growing it, I think it definitely wasn't all fun, but I definitely prioritized doing the things that I felt I was best at and that I most enjoyed, and trying my best to find people to fill in all the other cracks. And it wasn't always a perfect balance of those two things. Like, for example, fundraising, really, it's an art form and a science to get investors. And I happen to be quite skilled at that. I don't really enjoy it. But I know that I'm good at it. So it's one of those things that I had to kind of take on. I know if I'm trying to raise $500,000 next week, like I'm going to be the one to do that. I'm not going to outsource that or have someone else on the team. So, there were definitely some situations like that, but if that's the sacrifice I'm making, but 75% of the time I'm thrilled with the kinds of creative, visionary type work I get to do, then great. I'm also fortunate that I'm a bit of a systems nerd. So it's actually deeply joyful for me to build systems, to refine systems, and then kind of farm them out and see everything work and fall into place. I think if that sabbatical in 2017 taught me anything, it was that whatever I build, whatever I do from here on out, it needs to be something where I can, be sitting in a villa in the Maldives and have things run without me for a few weeks, because there's deep joy in that as well, as opposed to the micromanaging route that I think a lot of solopreneurs and entrepreneurs and founders slip into. And that was the time that I was falling asleep on my laptop, putting in 15, 18-hour days and frankly killing myself to scale. And it was not okay. There was nothing about that time that was okay. Did it expedite our growth? Probably. Was it worth it? I don't think so. I definitely lost a couple of years of my life, and many more years of that if I'm thinking about the lack of social connection and meaningful social interactions I was having with people outside of work.
Yeah, I think it's a real issue that a lot of solopreneurs who end up becoming entrepreneurs and running big things, I think we all go through it, because you start doing something and you're good at doing the thing. And so people pay you in sponsorship, in funding, in media opportunity, in working for you, whatever. Like people, like you suddenly start growing, but you go from being the doer to being the leader. All of a sudden, once you have a lot that you're managing underneath you, but you never become a manager, right? So there's no like doing to managing to leading evolution, and you have to kind of like backfill. And I think most solopreneurs never figure out the management part, and so they're leading, but they are building that cathedral, and they become the sun in the solar system. And as soon as they set, it's like everything's dark. It's difficult. So how did you figure out the systems part? Were you someone who was always a systems nerd? Maybe, but like managing the actual business that you were creating is different. How'd you learn how to backfill that?
Definitely. I mean, I think there's probably a bit of a advantage to starting so young because no one really expects you to have all the answers.
Right.
You know,
Which is
I
good,
think right. And I don't think anyone really ever has all the answers, but I think when you are in your 30s and your 40s, really even your late 20s, you show up to things and it's like, you really feel like you need to have the answer sometimes. Even though you don't, it gets more and more uncomfortable for you to say, I'm sorry, I've never heard that word before. Or can you explain how that works, please? Right? You don't, it's a lot, right? So I think
especially when everyone looks at you and they think you're the expert and you're like, well, if I tell them I'm not the expert, maybe they fund me.
You're the
maybe
guy on the stage, the woman on the stage. Exactly. Right. So I think at 13, 14, 15, 17 years old, it was pretty easy for me to show up and be like, okay, I want to do this better. What are your ideas? Right. So to reach out to consultants and mentors and to go to some remarkable companies out there. I had the privilege to work with, Microsoft. I've worked with Disney. And so to be in the room with those sorts of leaders and to get to pick their brains on how we could refine certain things, I think was incredibly helpful. I've always been a deeply curious person. I get that from my mom. It's how she raised me. And so I think asking questions is how we were able to perhaps optimize some of those trial and error times in finding the right systems, testing them, and proving them true.
You must have allowed yourself some amount of grace to know that there's just going to be mistakes along the way.
Sure. I mean,
I've always had trouble with that.
I think, and maybe this is also part of the timing and the stage of life that I was in, but it's like the first thing that comes to mind is like, God, yeah, like it was super difficult, but I was a teenager scaling this thing. I was literally 16, 17, 18 years old when Count Me was starting to take shape. It's like puberty was way harder. Right. I had so many other issues in my life, family issues, personal issues, that like the business issues were like the fun distraction, which again, I think if you're in your 30s and you have stability elsewhere, it's like, of course, the business is going to be where you have your greatest strife.
So I'm very interested that you're starting this as you're going through puberty. You don't completely even know who you are. You're ashamed of part of who you think you might be. You're coming to terms with some of that. You're not even sure what to deal with. You were mentioning self-hatred earlier on. And you're starting an organization that is all about showing up and really seeing each other. So you're showing up, talking to people about Sawubona, right? I see you. I really see you. I know who you are. I see you. I love you for who you are. And yet you are not who you are.
Yeah.
In this moment,
it's much easier to see other people than it is to see yourself.
So let's talk about how you, how you decided to be who you were, who you are, who you were born to be in this role, which you started off different. Like you had to come out as the leader of this organization in addition to coming out in your life.
Yes. And I continue to come out, right? Like that's part of being gay, part of the LGBTQ plus community.
You got to come out all day with everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was, everyone has a different journey. Everyone has a different story when it comes to, finding where you fall on the spectrum. We're all on the spectrum somewhere. And I had a lot of difficulty figuring out where that was for me. And part of that was definitely all kinds of suppressed self-hatred. Sounds strong, but it's probably close to accurate. And just deep shame about things in me that felt abnormal and things that felt wrong and things that I felt may not be accepted by others. And so trying to navigate that in the dark shadows of my life behind closed doors, it was like when I left my bedroom, I was a hollowed out, masked version of me. And the problem was I acted as that person so frequently that I started to buy into the lie. And so that was a whole other tangle of, thank God for therapy, that was really challenging to navigate and figure out and come to terms with. The crutch that I felt I needed at that time, my late teens, was a relationship. In my head, it did not make sense to come out to people when I was single, when I wasn't even really sure what I was navigating. To me, I almost started romanticizing the language around saying, I have a boyfriend versus I'm gay, right? The former felt way easier, way more natural, way more real. And so I did that. I met someone, and we started dating, and I was able to, my mom came into the kitchen one day to get a glass of water, and I turned to her and said, "So I'm seeing someone," and she like scurried over to the kitchen table and sat down next to me. I'll never forget. And she was like, "Oh, tell me more." And I was like, "His name is Joel." And without skipping a beat, God bless my mom, she says, "Oh, where does he go to school? What does he do?" And the conversation just went on from there. And it wasn't a thing. There was no Hollywood coming out.
Joel, sounds like a nice Jewish boy.
And he wasn't. But that was okay. But it was just, that to me was so easy. And he ended up being the crutch that I needed to come out. And definitely not a healthy relationship, not a good one. That's a whole other story, but definitely a necessary part for me in terms of being able to be more honest with myself. And I'm grateful every day to have a mom that didn't make it a thing. And, it never really has been. And she's there for me, and, we can have any conversation we want, but it just wasn't a thing. And I've experienced the opposite of that. Both myself with my dad and also with friends of mine. And I'm so grateful for her and moms like you that they just live and breathe unconditional acceptance, love, and support.
Yeah. I mean, for me, when they handed my second son to me in the hospital, I was like, this one's different than the first one. I don't know why, but there's something about him that's different. And the words I said to my husband were, "There's a sweetness to him that the other," which, by the way, there's not. But there was like something about him that was just different. And by the time he was 3, I was like, I think I know what it is. And by the time he was 5, I was like, yep. So by the time the conversation happened, I mean, I was like, yeah, okay, like pass the salt. Like
right.
It was not a surprise. And your mom probably knew. So it wasn't like a shocker. She was just waiting. Like, I read an article years ago about the difference between coming out and inviting in, and how one declares that we own the sexuality of anybody and the gender identity, the sexual identity of anyone around us just because we're heterosexual, which is, bullshit. And the other one is like, I don't just accept you, I celebrate you. And you are a full version of a human living in my house, living in my community, living in my world. So we had to wait. For him to invite us in. And my God, I was like, there were times where I would like lay out the welcome mat. I was like, please, like this is the moment. And
but you have to be ready. You have to be there yourself.
Ready.
Right?
You have to. And I could tell there were moments when he was more agitated or more angry with us or frustrated because he was fighting with this thing inside and didn't want to say it. But if he did, it could be a relief, or maybe like, and it's interesting because I don't know how much for him it was, I'm scared to do it because they won't accept me. I think it was more he was scared to do it because he didn't want to say the words, because he was still struggling with the same, if I say it, then it's true. And if it's true, then I'm different. And everyone wants to be special, but no one wants to be different, right? Especially when you're a teenager. That's a hard time. So you mentioned that it wasn't as easy with your dad, and that it wasn't as easy with clients. So I'm happy to delve into the relationship with your dad if you want, but I know that there's a story that you tell about a client who, after you went to speak, found out that you were gay and was pretty upset. And I'd love to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. What's interesting is, coming out or letting people in, as you so beautifully put, I think that it's a very personal experience. You look at the first person that comes to mind is Tim Cook, right? Who has been out to his family and friends for, let's say, forever, a long time, but wasn't out publicly until he felt like he really had to be, just to, to advocate, right? And so it was very similar, and I think a lot of people are, the number of professionals that I know that are privately out but publicly closeted, just because I think it'll mess with their job. I was the same. I was kind of like what you might consider a Disney star syndrome, where I was so protected, and I had an amazing PR team, and I had this whole public presence, and it was half other people and more than half, I'm sure, actually, the story in my own head that was like, well, you need to be private about this because it'll mess with the image. You need to be private about this because other people won't get it. If you private of this because maybe Count Me In will cease to exist. Maybe people won't want you to speak. Maybe you won't get interviews anymore. Maybe you won't, whatever, right? It was
people
just
like you who you are.
Lost less or more. Yeah.
Right. People like you who you are, who they know, what they see. Like if you change that, what does that change?
So I was really careful, and I was really private for a very long time, where, my friends knew, my family knew, but, I wasn't talking about it in interviews. I was careful and dodged pronouns at every point I could. And then,
exhausting.
Yes, very much so. And then there came a point where I think it was actually that I was pissed off. So it wasn't like I worked up and I was like ready for it. It was just like, I was pissed at all the hate I was seeing. I was angry at the amount of judgment and hate crimes, and it was tearing away at me. So it was less a building up of courage and more a fire burning inside of me that I need to stand up for people, because I have this microphone in my hand and I have a job where people see me and they seem to care what I think and what I do and what I say. So why the hell am I not using that platform to support my own community? And it was just this switch that flipped inside of me, and I've never been the same since. And I've used that platform to the best of my ability, and it's kind of ramped up month over month, year over year since. I think the first time was probably something like 4 years ago-ish, something like that, where I first got on a stage and I was like, today's the day. I am going to say something, use a pronoun, like whatever, make it clear. It's not kind of part of my signature story, but I'm just going to make it clear that I'm gay. And I was like shaking. I was so nervous getting to the part where I knew I was going to say it, and I said it, and nothing happened. The world didn't cave in. There wasn't applause either. Like it wasn't so much a thing. I was like, that felt really good though. And then I kept doing it every single time. And sometimes it would come up in the Q&A. Sometimes I'd have, someone come to me, the audience afterwards during like the meet and greet or like signing autographs, and like tell me how much it meant to them because, their son is gay, or because they are, or, how great it is, or, whatever, they're an ally. And it was just beautiful. It just started to become like, this is part of who I am. And I get to now be vocal about that. And it felt great. And all great things come to an end, right? So I was speaking,
not everybody loved it. Yeah,
not everyone. I was speaking at a conference in Wyoming, and I knew the area I was in. I knew they were very conservative, and I was like, you know what? You are you. Anywhere that you go in the world, this isn't the time to hide. And so, still found that, way to just weave into the story on stage that, I'm gay. This is part of who I am. And it went great, like crazy applause, incredible Q&A. The meeting planner at the end was like laughing with me and seemed so thrilled. And like, everyone was great. It seemed awesome. And I got a call from my agent, the agent who booked the event for me the next day. He asked how the event went, and I said, amazing. He was like, so I just got an email from the event planner. I don't know how to tell you, so I'm just going to read it to you. And I was like, okay, it must be great feedback.
Right, you're expecting praise.
I mean, it seemed like it went so well.
Yes.
And he read this email that said, Shane knocked the message out of the park. He hit all of our goals. Thank you for all your help coordinating. I have to say, we were taken aback when he said that he was gay. We weren't aware. That's not aligned with our organization's values, so we feel deceived, and we'd like to request a full refund. And I'm trying to find the words. I like it because that being hard to hear, like, I don't even know. I was heartbroken. I wasn't angry. I wasn't mad. I was heartbroken. Like, I had him forward me the email because I had to read it for myself. Like, I had a hard time comprehending, especially having like met these people, having had the experience. This wasn't like blind hate online, right? It's like, I knew how much I helped. I knew based on the positive feedback I received that night from dozens and dozens of people in the audience, like it did not compute. It did not make sense to me that who I love and how I'm biologically wired has any bearing on, what I professionally did to support their organization. So that was hard. What was even harder was that I was not aware of this, but in going back and forth, the agency that actually booked this event for me ended up, just to kind of cover their own butts, they ended up actually offering a partial refund, which was kind of a really big slap in my face and felt like a betrayal for me. So I also had to navigate that. They didn't understand, so I had to educate them on how this was, getting into hate crime territory, and this was not acceptable. You can't offer a refund to a company because of this. Like, that's not appropriate. Right. So it was several months of these kinds of hard conversations, really emotional evenings with my support group, and then getting onto stages and forcing myself through the same lines, because I wasn't about to get weaker. I was going to use this to fuel my strength. But Laura, I was like physically shaking on stage when I was getting to the part in my speech where I was going to say it. Like, I got so anxious. I was dealing with some severe anxiety and stress for at least 6 months following this. Every time I got on a stage, I just felt like I was going to get hit with a rotten tomato, or worse. So yeah, it was tough. But again, like these people need love, and then you look at the stats and you realize, well, Wyoming has one of the highest teen suicide rates in the country. And you wonder why.
Yeah. And what's so interesting to me, I mean, there's so many interesting parts of the story, but what really strikes me is that I think for so many of us, we understand hatred to be, well, they're ignorant. They just don't know. They've never met anyone like me. They haven't had the experience. They don't know, like, right, that, I'm Jewish, but I don't have horns coming out of my head, right? Like they've only experienced racist tropes or memes or, the fake news that has been in their own silo. But once they meet someone, right? Like I remember there's a whole campaign Rachel Maddow had about like encouraging anyone who's gay to come out, because if you find out that your neighbor is gay and, oh wait, my neighbor barbecues on the weekend just like me, they're normal. I guess gay is normal, right? Yeah. And I always had a lot of uncertainty around that. Like, it sort of felt like, well, why should you have to take it on the chin and come out so that I can know that you're normal? Like that just feels like an undue burden. But then to have an experience where you've spent time with them, they've seen you, they know you, and still the rejection, it is personal, and it is so wrong in so many ways, because it's like, and it goes against everything that you're doing at Count Me In, right? Like, I see you. Once I see you, then you exist. And they were like, I see you, and by the way, you still don't exist.
I'm literally like, the speech was on community building and coming together.
Right. Like, you have to desperately want to cling to your ignorance.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
absurd. It's just absurd. But like I said, love, like that's the best weapon that I have. And it sounds cheesy and ridiculous and like it belongs in a children's book. But I feel like that's how we've seen any meaningful change happen, especially in the last couple of years. It's when we show up with heart and with tolerance and with respect, and we just kind of accept people where they're at and try our best to educate, to invite them in, because when you find out your neighbor who barbecues just like you is gay, and when that happens, a dozen times in your life, in your broader circles, suddenly it's not so different anymore. Suddenly I'm not so on the outside, right?
So there's that expression that we all plant seeds for trees that will never have that will never sit under the shade of the trees we plant or something like that, right? Like you are doing the work to change the world in a way that you may not get the benefits that the generations after you will get. And your lot in life, if you're going to continue to be righteously indignant about who you are and the way the world should be, is that you're going to be the one who has to struggle and suffer at times so that other people can have that shade.
Sure. Yeah.
That's an exhausting prognosis, right? Like that's an exhausting path to take. So how do you carve out some time to find, maybe it's shade that was created by other people who came before you, or how do you mentioned therapy earlier, you and I talked about travel before we started recording. How do you take care of yourself in these moments where you know that you've got a speech coming up and you're going to get on stage and you know that line's going to come and you're going to say it and you're 99% sure that it's going to be fine and people are going to applaud, or they're not going to applaud, but they're going to come up to you in the book signing line after, or connect with you on social media after and thank you for saying the thing that they needed someone to say. And yet you now have this trauma in the back of your head that's just going to be there, and it's going to sit and it's going to fester, and there's always that chance. There's always that chance. How do you manage that?
So part of it is honestly coming to terms with reality. I think there's two things that play together here for me in my life. First is I'm Jewish, and my grandparents are and were Holocaust survivors. We lost so many people in our community through the Holocaust, and that's something that is generational. And I look back at that time, and I think to myself, through my unique perspective of also being gay, that, well, every part of that was horrific, and yet I still had 4 grandparents, and I still exist today. And then I think about the LGBTQ plus community and how I don't have a generation of mentors to look up to because of AIDS. We lost an entire generation of people who were not offered any kind of care or protection or support through a horrific health crisis. Now, perhaps the world has a bit of an inkling of a perspective outside of the LGBTQ plus community because of COVID, of what it looks like when there's a pandemic that rips through, and it's not just a subset of an ill-respected minority group. But I think about the responsibility I have because I'm here and I don't have generations to look up to above me. So I need to be that generation. We all do. And this is something that other gay friends and I will talk about, right? We're all very aware that we do not have the kinds of people to look up to that we know the next generations will, because we're here and we have to be strong for them. We have to plant those trees now to give them shade that we never had. And so there's responsibility and there's ownership in that, and understanding that story and thinking about that is part of what kind of keeps me grounded in it, because there's greater purpose, and purpose, as you know, is something that is so powerful and can really pull you through. As far as general self-care practices, long gone are the days where I fall asleep on my laptop. I really, really honor my work time, but I'm far more fierce about protecting my social time. And I work out every morning. I read every day. I'm really, really a firm believer in personally led personal development. So doing all the things I can on a day-to-day to make sure that I'm feeding my mind and my soul and my body. And then trips are huge for me. I love travel. It's been really challenging these last couple of years with the lack of it. And so really excited to get back out there in the world. 2019, I was on something like 130 flights. So coming to such a grounding halt has been jarring, and yet also helped me realize how much I love my city, how perhaps if I travel a little less, I won't be just as single as I am. So there's been other moments that I've been like, oh, okay, I can't wait to get back out there, but maybe not 8 flights a week. But I really do miss travel, and exploring the world is part of my self-care and self-growth practice for sure. But yeah, taking care of my body, eating well, and meditating, all those sorts of things are really what help keep me sane and stable.
Yeah. In the beginning of COVID, I found myself like, I was having this long conversation with Tasha Eurich about it, New York Times bestselling author of Insight.
Yeah.
And she's all about self-awareness. Like that's her whole thing. And I called her up and I was like, I think I'm losing my mind. Like I can't remember words. I can't remember numbers. I can't form sentences. Like I just, I don't understand. I have every privilege in the world. I'm safe at home. I can do my job from here. I've got a, healthy marriage, a happy family. Like, why am I struggling so much? I shouldn't be struggling so much. And she's like, Laura, she's like, I'm going through the same thing. Like we spent all of our time on a plane going. And then all of a sudden you stop and you're like, guess I'm just here. I guess I gotta like all the things that I didn't realize I was out running are all sitting in my office with me. We're all hanging out on the couch together. And I guess I got to deal with them. And I really found myself kind of losing my way. And so I set up this spreadsheet, just a Google spreadsheet, and I invited a bunch of friends to join me. And I had like 25 people doing it with me. And I was like, okay, what are the pillars of self-care? And it was like hydration, nutrition, rest and recovery and movement. And I was like, okay, if we drink, 60 or whatever, a gallon of water a day, if we move 60 minutes a day, if we, follow whatever diet you follow, like keto, macros, low carb, whatever, South Beach, whatever the diet is that you follow. And then 8 hours of sleep a night. And I was like, okay, now my previous life, I would have been like, if I don't get 8 hours of sleep a night, I don't get a point. If I don't drink a gallon of water, I don't get a point. But I was like, it's COVID. We're all going to give ourselves some grace. So I was like, okay, if I drink 3/4 of a gallon, that's 3/4 of a point. Good. And like every day I would just like give myself a point. And it's like any day where like the average was over 3 points, I'm like, that's a winning day. And at the end of it, there was a column that was like, what went well today and what will I work on tomorrow? Not like what didn't go well today. And it was like, it was such an exercise in radical self-care and like finding grace and just knowing that like, it's not that difficult, right? Like meditating, reading, working out in the mornings, like the things that you have to do. We all know what they are.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
Yeah, we all do.
Them.
But when you're going 1,000,000 miles a second at 30,000 feet in the air, right? It's easy.
And when you have all these people who rely on you also.
Yeah, but you really can't pour from an empty cup. And, I think we live in a society where perhaps still with many people, but certainly before COVID, you really did believe that you needed to light yourself on fire in order to keep others warm. And that is so not the case. And I think if this last chapter has taught me, and I know so many others it's that we need to take care of ourselves if we're going to have enough to give, both from a family standpoint, a social friendship standpoint, and very much from a work standpoint.
Yes. Okay, so talk to me about the moment when you are by yourself in your apartment, single, living alone in the middle of a pandemic, and you get a call, maybe an email, I don't know, that Oprah picked your book about community as one of her favorite things. I know that
I thought it was wrong. I thought it was a mistake. It was so funny. I did. I got an email from my manager, and it was something like, Oprah loves your book. I was like, what are you talking about? And it was just like a link and saying like, congrats. Like it was just selected as part of Oprah's favorite things. And I was like, I think this is a mass email to like maybe everyone who was with this publisher, because my book isn't out yet. It's like it comes out in the spring. This is like Christmas and Hanukkah time. It's coming. So I was like, what is happening? So it's like, that's awesome. It's like good for them. So I click on the link and I'm scrolling. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. It was like all feature. And I scroll. I was like, that's my book cover. My book. What? And then I got an email like an hour later from the publishers being like, hey, your book was released early. Surprise. So it was actually selected. And it was just like nuts. Just so cool to be part of a publishing house and a group of books that was getting that kind of momentum and steam. What's particularly neat is that it's a children's book. So like this was like a fun side project. This was like a little thing I was doing. This publisher came to me. It's called A Kid's Book About. And they do a kid's book about everything. A kid's book about divorce, a kid's book about COVID, a kid's book about bullying, a kid's book about mine is community. And so when they came to me, I was like, this is such a great gift to like just put out there to the world. I have all these little cousins, like pseudo nieces and nephews. And I was like, it'd be so great for a book for 5 to 7-year-olds about how to make friends, how to find your community, how to get a deeper sense of belonging. But it was just a little side project. And I never thought it was going to take off like this. It is so, so cool. So such a little meaningful and fun release that I love seeing pictures of, my family, my little cousins reading it. And it's really cool.
It's so fun. I think every author dreams of that moment. I was recording a live podcast, and the guy who was introducing me was like, and she's everywhere. She's even in the Washington Post right behind Michelle Obama as a bestseller. And I was like, ha 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 ha. And he's like, no, really? I was like, wait, what? Mm-hmm. And I remember it was April 1st. And my book came out on April 2nd, I think, or April 7th. It wasn't even out yet. We had the same reaction. I was like, you're kidding. I thought it was an April Fool's joke. So I immediately Googled myself, and there it was. And I was like, how did he pull that off? And he created a link. So then I texted our friend Mitch Joel. I texted my husband. I texted like 7 people. And I'm like, can you see if this is all the while I'm trying to do this interview live? I was like, is this how is because it's you don't even know. And then all of a sudden it's like, ding, surprise, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Here's your thing.
Yeah. They think you get a call or something, but you don't. Sometimes an email, I guess. But yeah, it's also very, I'm glad that was my reaction. It's nice that was yours, right? I think there's a fine balance between imposter syndrome and just total cockiness where you're like, this is surprising, but also damn straight, your book is awesome. That's absolutely where it should be, right? So I think I think we had appropriate reactions.
But it's the same moment. I had the same moment that you had when you had 400 people in that auditorium where you're like,
right.
What if we got 4,000, right? What if we got more? This could be bigger, right? Did you have that reaction, or were you just like, holy shit, wow?
No,
cool.
I mean, because it was I'm not about to go do, a children's series or it was just a one-off side thing that is so separate from what I do. I mean, it's still very value aligned and very me. But from a strategic standpoint, no, this is just a fun little thing on the side.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very cool. It's very, very cool. I'm grateful.
Amazing. Shane, I could talk to you all day, but I know I asked for an hour of your time. So tell people who are listening where they can find out more about you, about Count Me In, and anything that if they want to connect with you on socials.
Well, I mean, ShaneFeldman.com is the best place to connect with me. And then, of course, Shane Feldman, wherever you social. It'd just be awesome to connect with you. If there's any way I can support you, if you want to reach out, slide into my DMs anytime. That's where I live online.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shane. You are amazing.
You too, my friend. Thank you for having me on.